Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever people are. So obviously virtual conferences, people are all different times, so it's a pleasure to be here. So first of all, just do quick introductions. One did a great job of introducing me. So I'm basically working with Ripple at the moment as an advisor on the CBDC program, and some really interesting things that we want to talk you through. And Brett has been around Ripple for a while. Brett, do you just want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, great intro from Juan. I think the interesting thing would be one of the longer tenured people at Ripple. I've been at the company for 7 years, and 7 years of experience in the blockchain industry. A lot of that bridging that gap between the traditional finance and blockchain.
Cool, thanks, Brett. So just so everyone knows, we're going to do this more of a conversation style, so that it's more of a conversation with myself and Brett, but more importantly, there's the question button. I don't know whether it's up, down, left or right, but if you've got any questions, please ask them. We're really interested in questions. The most important parts, in our view, come a little bit further along, which is the real use cases of Bhutan, and an exclusive, which is around Palau, which is our very, very exciting new project. And our VP is actually out there at the moment, and it takes about 24 hours or more to get there because it's an island in the middle of the Pacific. So, but that said, there's very nice beaches. So, traveling to nice beaches is always good for your job. So what we're going to talk around is these subjects where we think are the sort of three key problems, the key areas to overcome for CBDCs around interoperability, public-private partnerships, and neutral bridge currencies. So basically the linking currencies. So where do we start? I mean, for now, the main thing really is that many payment systems are very slow and antiquated, and also they're very siloed. So we all know when we're making payments, things take a while to move. Settlement isn't instantaneous. Weekends, quite often payments aren't settled, etc. So for us, this is really where we're coming from in saying, look, CBDC and associated payment systems really need to address this. Ooh, that one didn't work. There we go. So what we're looking for, this is the ultimate aim, a fast, cost-efficient payment systems. So this is the problem, one of the main problems we're trying to fix with CBDCs and wider payments. So imagine this world where payments take place in seconds at near zero cost. So I don't know whether anybody, sends money abroad at the moment, but, if you're sending money abroad, you're talking about days for settlement, and you're talking about costs in tens, if not more, dollars, depending on what you're doing. So one way to think about it, this is from our CTO, is think about a transaction that would cost as much and take as long as short amount of time as loading a web page. And I think that's a really interesting way to do it, because we just press web pages, either on your phone as an app or a web page. We just do that instantaneously, and that for us is a really interesting way to think about it. And Brett, you've been working on this for a while, just the normal payment system, let's call it. What's your thoughts on where we are on this, and how does this really relate back to CBDCs?
Yeah, I mean, so there are, when we first started doing this at Ripple and going around, I think we were focusing on cross-border payments, and we could make that statement. Sorry for the construction behind me. I'm in Manhattan right now, so gets a little noisy. We could ask that question, who sends cross-border? Who sends a cross-border payment? And there'd always be friction. And I could count on there always be friction in that cross-border payment. But over the last few years, actually, there are corridors that are efficient. There are corridors that are cheap, and there are corridors that are fast. That's where private companies can see a profit. And private companies have focused on where they can make profits in the very large corridors. You're going to see us talk about the nation of Bhutan, and they have a problem in this area because private companies don't see that they can make large profits from sending payments into Bhutan. And so a central bank digital currency, that's where a nation can come in here, where private companies can't see a profit. A nation can come in and lay an infrastructure, and a central bank digital currency is that infrastructure that a nation can lay.
Yeah, and it's a really excellent point around the public-private side as well. And one of the sort of key areas we said we talk about, it's not just around the government and the central bank itself doing this. They're probably shouldn't say it in this way, but they're a small part of this. Probably the most important part. They're sort of the top of the tree for currencies and payments, but actually the payments are made further down, you know, past commercial banks, past your retail banks, into your payment providers. And you think about when you're buying your coffee and you swipe your card or you scan a QR code or whatever you do, that's where the majority of the volume is done. And it's a really good, Brett, you know, linking that back to the CBDCs and why we need to look at this as a whole. This is not just, you know, let's do the digital dollar, the digital pound, euro. This is about the entire ecosystem of our lives, really, which is why, you know, CBDCs are so important.
We're also flattening this, all the players that are involved in a payment. So, you know, one of the things that we've seen is, you know, I'd love to bring you cheap payments with only technology. You know, I'm an engineer by trade. I go for a technology solution, but it doesn't matter what the technology is. If a party has to touch it, they're going to want to make some money. And so the more people that are involved in our process, the more expensive it's going to be. And so when we flatten that process, we can make it cheaper for everybody.
Exactly. And this is a great diagram to sort of help explain that. If you look at each of the, I think they're like platforms on the CBDC world, but they're like pedestals, let's call them. You know, you've got mobile phones, you've got wallets, physical wallets, you know, on, offline, that's another discussion another time, but people, factories, offices, that's what this needs to make interoperable and seamless. But the commercial banks, the retail banks, the payment providers, all of those need to work together. And that's, you know, a really key part of solving this CBDC problem for governments. And then if we look at the next one then, and this is a really interesting part, it's then not just the interoperability within the country or within the jurisdiction of that payment. It's then how do we link everything else? And, you know, Brett, what's your thoughts around trying to link CBDCs? And let's just think big picture. How do we link the digital dollar, the digital pound, and the digital yen? You know, how does this work?
Well, I think the first thing to realize is that every nation in the world is not going to decide to use the same technical solution. Yeah. So, I mean, that's something that I think we know is not going to happen. Now, maybe regions of the world will come together who already have organizations and decide on a regional solution. But we are going to have different technological solutions. And the key is in adopting a solution that's built to connect to another technology and doesn't limit you. So as soon as you buy into a system that's proprietary and says you can only connect to someone who's using the same system, then you're really taking away the future of your CBDC. And so I think the immediate use cases for a CBDC are domestic within the nation, but everybody we talk to has goals beyond that and goals of making their markets available to other, globally. Goals of creating liquidity for cross-border payments and other transactions. And this all relies on this interoperability. And so with the CBDC solution at Ripple and other solutions out there, you'll see there's going to be an opening or a hook to connect to other systems. And in our world, this is called federation. And we actually have a system that's a blockchain system that acts as a federator between our solution and any other solution. And so as we want to connect to these other solutions, we build these federators. Think of them as adapters from our normal world, but they're full blockchain solutions with all the immutability and all the transparency that we get from a blockchain solution. But no matter what that is, it's really the fact that you have a solution that can connect to something else.
Exactly.
That's the key. That's the key here, and that you build from the beginning with that in mind.
And I think, there's a couple of questions, but one just related to this. I'll come back to Jeff's after, but Sylvia's just asked, are there going to be winners and losers from the introduction of CBDCs? What's your thoughts on that? I'm not sure whether they're talking about winners and losers in terms of companies to do this, or winners and losers just in general. But I suppose to kick off, I'd say, exactly as Brett's just said, there's not going to be one CBDC provider globally at all, without any question. The world never agrees on anything. and I think even regionally, Brett, is probably a little bit optimistic, but anyway, we can always dream. But yeah, so I think the reality that we have is it's going to be different. Some will not be DLT. So for example, Bank of Jamaica at the moment are going down the non-DLT route. They launched theirs in 24 days, actually. They're launching theirs on Christmas Eve this year. So there are countries that will be doing this non-DLT. Some will be using our platform and some will be using other platforms. But the most important thing is thinking about the scalability, the interoperability part of that. Would you say anything else on that one, Brett, just around winners and losers and introductions of CBDCs?
Yeah, and I think that maybe there won't be winners and losers, but there will be nations that have an easier path to their ultimate goal, and ones that will have to change direction and pivot more. So, I don't think you tie yourself in and say, once you go down this path, you're probably not going to cancel your CBDC project if you see success throughout the world, but you may pivot on your solution and how you did it, and that may be expensive, in time and resources. So, hopefully we learn from our mistakes and we move on. We don't just can the project and stop.
Yeah. And I think one of the parts of it, winners and losers, will be around financial inclusion and sustainability, which we'll talk about in about 5 minutes or so. So we'll come on to that in a second. So let's just talk about the future. I like this slide, by the way, everyone. So this is my graphic slide. I didn't do it. Somebody else did it, but this is the best slide of the deck. So just to, let's think big picture where we're trying to get to, and then we'll come into the use cases and the reality. What we're talking about is a world of payments where tiny payments or large payments are made instantaneously everywhere. So there's no delay, there's no, issues around this. It's you can pay 0.001 cents, so for example, royalties for a musician, so every time you listen to a musician, they don't get paid well, they may or may not get paid at the moment. We know it's getting better, but with blockchain technology and then CBDCs and payments all together, the owners of the rights, the royalties could get paid every second 0.01, because the cost of this will be so low, and it'll be immutable and the way it is. What about asset tokenization and programmable money and DeFi, Brett? These are really exciting parts. So over to you on this a little bit.
And these future items are really why people are looking at central bank digital currencies. As far as functionality goes, interestingly enough, when you're on the ground doing a project as I am, you spend a good deal of your time recreating the current processes the way that you do things now, right? So but we need to paint this picture of the future. It's going to take a little while to get to micropayments, right? We're laying the infrastructure for that. One of the things that my clients are most interested in is a world of asset tokenization. And, we have many different workflows where this fits in. It fits in very well to our wholesale workflow where commercial banks are putting up collateralization. and we can tokenize those assets. And we could have not only the central bank digital currency on a blockchain ledger, but we also have the assets that you're using for collateral. And we can do that wholesale within the direct participants of the banks, of the central bank system. But we can also expand that out to the citizens too. So we can tokenize securities in the capital markets of the nation. And when we do that, we start getting into this world where things are controlled with algorithms and cryptography instead of by trusted companies. And when we do that, things are cheaper. That's one, and we don't need to charge flat fees. We can charge percentages of what someone is using. That's how we facilitate these micropayments. That's how we can start facilitating small amounts of securities being bought, instead of having to have large purchases. We also have instant settlement, since both the assets and the payment are on the same ledger. So we're settling instantly for any of these tokenized assets.
Yeah, exactly.
Programmable money. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just about to say, and programmable money is, what's your thoughts around that? Because that's a really interesting one. I think one of the areas for that is, I'll kick it off by saying one of the areas is a bit concerning, I think, in general, around programmable money, that in a way, as a citizen, the government, the central bank, could program the money so that you can only use that money in the local shop or to pay your rent, etc. So it's programmable money has a great side, which you'll mention, but there also is the human citizen side, which is just as important. And we're a tech company, we're not politicians, we're not regulators, but I think there is that side of programmable money which would be interesting to explore, with academia and other people in that. But programmable money for the good bits, what's your thoughts, Brad?
Yeah, I mean, so there's that side of it, but there's also the side of programmable money where I could receive money and automatically pay my taxes. So that we didn't have to have taxes, so that when you did a transaction, the taxes automatically went to the government when that happened.
Can we pay zero tax? Is that what you're suggesting?
Oh, you're paying it up front, I guess. You're still, I don't have that solution.
Yeah.
I don't think I can't get rid of death or taxes for you, but I can make it an upfront payment,
And you know what, Brett, that's an interesting one, because I've taught to the Inland Revenue in the UK for a few years, because I used to be retail and e-commerce, and when we were talking about supply chain and blockchain, I said, look, why don't we just tax transactions when they're paid, all the way through the supply chain? It's a lot easier. And one of the guys from HMRC was in the audience, and that sort of kicked off the discussions for the last 3 or 4 years now in my life. But I personally think it's a lot easier, because if the money in your bank account is your bank, that's your money. There's no taxes liable. There's no other parts. It's actually easier for us. So I do think that's a good thing. But I know over the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of people have said they don't want that. Which is interesting, because that's back to trust in governments and regulations, which is, above our pay grade as such. But it's a really interesting thought around programmable money. And then just onto the one of the sexy topics at the moment, is DeFi. So just your thoughts on DeFi.
Well, I think, and again, this may go back to that winners and losers question. We often get asked, what's the role of the commercial banks and the current participants in this system? And are we going to disintermediate them? And Ripple has a history of working with those commercial banks, as I've been doing for the last 7 years. And we actually think this is a huge opportunity for commercial banks to use the technology to provide services to their customers, and use this new technology, this decentralized finance technology, to use instead of using their balance sheet to give loans and provide liquidity, to use the balance sheet of their customers. And we see a world where you log into your your bank's online banking, and you will have these DeFi services available to you without the risk you currently have using cryptocurrencies, because we're now using your country's sovereign currency.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I see Paolo's going to answer one of Jeff's questions. The question at the bottom, Jeff, you just asked, which is a good, do businesses pay their taxes based around receivables and payables rather than cash flow? And I suppose my answer to that is yes, they do currently, but actually you could easily do it through cash flows and that side of it if you program the whole system in a way. So, you know, programmable money or transaction taxing, which, you know, we talk about, you know, with HMRC, and I know you're in some of those sessions, Jeff. It is very complex because of that sort of the current way of doing things. But imagine if we had the shadow ledger, the third ledger, the blockchain ledger of all accounting. Why not? You can do it at source. Now, I'm not suggesting it's going to happen quickly. Maybe not even in my lifetime, to be fair, because it's such a big change and it's such a long change. But I think, you know, the idea is a really interesting idea.
You know, we didn't talk about escrow there, Anthony. I think that's another exciting part of programmable money. It opens up many use cases, especially for this audience, is if you have this ability to put funds on escrow and to designate some kind of notary to advance those funds or not. That opens up many use cases, you know, use cases where you're buying a home. You know, things that, at least in the United States, are rather archaic now, you know, where you have to involve many parties and lawyers and able to do this. We could do this programmatically. And if Anthony was buying something from me, I could look at the ledger and see that these funds were locked up and designated for me, and who that notary was who would allow the funds to flow to me or not. And we could agree on that notary. And that's a really, really powerful use case for programmable money.
Definitely, definitely. And the last point, there's loads more that we've not even thought about. But on that note, let's talk about a couple of our projects, because I know people want to hear about those. And the first one is the Bhutan, the Royal Monetary of Bhutan. So we're working with this country now to pilot retail, cross-border and wholesale payments. So the whole, really the whole spectrum in a way, apart from you know, the full areas. And I think the interesting thing with this, two parts, and then Brett will give you some really interesting discussion insights around this, because he's been working with them, is first of all the financial inclusion. So the bottom sort of sentence here, Bhutan want to do this, one, for sustainability. So XRP Ledger is fully sustainable, the most sustainable out of all blockchains. And secondly, this financial inclusion, and we want to increase that to 85% by 2023. So obviously year after next now, but only sort of 12 months or so from now. So it's a big challenge, a big opportunity to architect in a small country. You know, this is a small country, but the whole, in a way, end to end. So, you know, CBDC from the central bank all the way down to the payments and the retail side of it. And this is why I think this is really interesting, because financial inclusion is something that we've not mentioned yet, but one of the critical parts of a CBDC is allowing everyone who has access to a phone and technology, can't see a phone, there you go, to be able to actually interact and use this. Now, there's online, offline issues, and there's cash versus, you know, physical side of digital money. But in essence, if you take the best example for me is the COVID, you know, when it started 18 months ago, and most of the Western governments were giving money to businesses, to people to just survive. You know, some were other reasons, but in essence, this helicopter money type scenario, that was really unbelievably difficult in the UK and probably other countries, because for example, so I work with the small businesses, they wanted to give loans, but they didn't have the bank account details or know how to find the bank account details quickly for the small businesses. And then they didn't know what they were entitled to. And so there's this whole system to try and get money to people. So the government says, yes, let's give this for this or this. but the entire system is so complex and so wide and disparate that they weren't able to do it in a decent time. It took a long time. I remember I spoke to Ireland at the time. They managed to do it within 2 or 3 months. I think the UK took more than 6 months, and there was a lot of issues around it. So financial inclusion on that side of it, and helping older people, for example, next door, you know, the lady can't go out because of COVID, you know, how are we going to pay for it? You know, she can't give you the bank card. How can we help and do her shopping and things? So financial inclusion, massive sustainability. But over to you, Brett, because you've been working with these guys and got some really interesting things and anecdotes around the discussion here.
Yeah, you know, the first thing I think of, because you're speaking of financial inclusion, is, you know, first off, how lucky Ripple is to work with Bhutan, because it is actually technically sophisticated country. And we have, I think, 85%, if not higher, of the nation has access to the internet, and they're, you know, soon going to have 100% access across the country. It's, you know,
Wow.
it's a very manageable country. So we have this great place to roll out a central bank digital currency, where they do have technical sophistication, but they also have some rural parts of the population. One of the things to think of, and one of the things certainly the Ripple team learned here, is it's not just about how many people have a phone and how many people have internet access. They need to know how to use it. So digital education is really one of the things that we're looking at, and will certainly be a key to our success. So even at this early stage, we were already looking at how are we going to promote this to the citizens? How are we going to educate them? And from a technology point, how do we make this so that people can use it? Because this world of digital wallets and cryptocurrency is not user friendly. And I think anyone who has delved into this world, it's cryptocurrencies and digital wallets, they can be rather scary and hard to use. Even private money, people have a hard time. One of the problems in Bhutan is there's multiple forms of private money available. And it may be easy for everyone on this call right now to have two different types of private money and send them to each other and bridge that gap. But it may be very difficult for some people. And that may be a very difficult concept even to understand, that they have money on one system with one telco that they can't use with another telco. You know, and this problem that, you know, multiple nations I've talked to have is these different silos in their digital private money that's dispersed in their nation, and that you can't move funds from one to another. Another interesting thing that brings up is the technology is not the only solution here. In Bhutan, we could roll out our central bank digital currency, and we could get all of the different participants in the system to use it. We need one piece of regulation to accompany this, though, and that is, if you're going to participate in the central bank digital currency, you need to allow payments outside your system, and you need to allow payments to come in. So this is an area where I've seen nations that are currently rolling out central bank digital currency miss. And so that's a problem that they have now. Their payment service providers have adopted the central bank digital currency, but they did not create the means to send it in and out of their network, right? They're protecting their private company and they're protecting their network. And the policy didn't accompany the rollout to say, okay, you also need to allow this to come in and out of your network. Yeah. So things that we're thinking about from the get-go. So there's a lot of tracks to this project. There's the technical and operational tracks that I'm very involved in, but there's a marketing track. There's a marketing to the nation, right? And there's a policy track to this.
Exactly. And also there's a very interesting not problem, but challenge in in Bhutan. So talk us through that in terms of cash, physical
Oh.
cash.
So that's going to be whenever you talk about CBDC, one of your big questions is going to be, is this a cash replacement? And there are nations where that is a driving factor in why they're rolling out a CBDC. There are nations where that is not, where they're always going to have cash, and it's very important. You know, I just spent 4 years in the UK in London, and certainly in the US and in New York City, they use cash much more, and there's a real emotional attachment to cash here. I can never see the United States going away from cash. Maybe not the UK either, but less so the United States. And so, you know, do we want to replace cash in Bhutan, and what are the challenges? Well, cash has a very important role in Bhutan. If you don't know this, Bhutan is a Buddhist monarchy. And one of the things that you often do in Bhutan is, maybe if you're having a wedding or you're opening up a new store, you'll have a Buddhist monk do a blessing, and you will give them fresh currency to do that blessing. And it's very important to have a brand new bill, clean, uncrinkled bill when you give this gift. The central bank in Bhutan actually has special stations where you can turn in your old, crinkled, dirty bills and get fresh ones just to support this. It's a major part of the culture.
Yeah.
So how do we, you know, when we look at that, we don't want to say you can never do this, and maybe they will always use some kind of physical cash, but the start is to give a way to do it digitally. Right? And we need to find a way to do that, you know, and that may be at first talking to the monastery and seeing what would be acceptable to them, you know, and that's part of our promotion and our marketing of the solution.
And I think, you know, so we need to move on, but really interesting, and I think that highlights the story and the anecdote around the, you know, pristine, you know, bills, notes, is something that we all have to think about with CBDCs. So it's not just, do people want to have their dollar bills or not, like New Yorkers? New Yorkers can use the phones, ultimately, let's be realistic. But actually, this is a religious, a very deep-seated cultural reason. So, you know, I think part of what I've learned over the last 12 months or so is, I don't think we're getting rid of cash, we're reducing it significantly. And we may substitute cards or some physical, you know, process with it. But this is not about replacement of cash everywhere. You know, so something to think about there. I think it was a really interesting area. And then let's talk about Palau. So Palau is a beautiful island where our VP is sunbathing now, no doubt. And this is really interesting, and I personally think it's going to be slightly controversial, this one ultimately. But we're going to be using the XRP ledger and our CBDC ledger to create a government-issued national stablecoin, so a US-backed digital currency for a sovereign nation. So a US-backed stablecoin for a sovereign nation. Amazingly interesting project, and something that, when you think about it, is actually really needed. So this is not just doing a digital dollar for the, you know, the physical United States. This is about a country which uses the dollar and has the agreements, obviously, with the Fed and the US government to actually have a CBDC version of it. Which, how does that work, and the rest of it? So really interested in this one. Brett, I know this is new, this is sort of, we're work in progress, but tell us a little bit about this project, you know, so far.
Yeah, so you know, as you said, Palau is a US dollar economy, you know, with a close relation to the United States. And they're exploring this possibility now. So, you know, of course, they're not going to do this without a close contact with the United States government. This isn't something you just roll out overnight, but first thing you need to do is start exploring it, start start, looking at the policy, all those different tracks that we spoke of earlier. Start looking at those tracks and how you would do it. The XRP ledger has had issued currencies on it for the past 9 years, and is a perfect solution for rolling out these kind of issued currencies. The big deal here is that it would be backed by a nation and not a private entity. So they're looking at this for many reasons. They're looking at it to support their citizens. They're looking at it for other companies to come into Palau and create their businesses in Palau. But they could also compete with other US dollar stablecoins that are out there, such as USDC and Tether, that are on the market. And there'd be a trust here. It's all about trust. I say trust and cryptography quite a bit here. There's cryptography involved, but there's also trust involved. And when you're issuing a stable coin, you need to trust that the issuer will give you your US dollars if you want them. And there will be a great deal of trust in the nation of Palau that the nation of Palau could redeem your currency. So very, very exciting for us. Again, these smaller countries can do things faster. So that's why we have someone, from a professional services and implementer like myself involved. We're not just writing an academic paper at this point. We're actually going in there with these nations and doing things. So it's very, very exciting.
No, definitely, really exciting. And I'm looking forward to my 24-hour trip there at some stage. Just need James to sign it off. Hopefully he's watching. Question from Jeff, which I think is really important for us to mention, and we'll try and get Sylvia as well. How can we ensure that all persons have the ability to engage with the economy without involving banks or payment networks? That's not what we're saying at all. So I'm not saying, or we're not saying that we get rid of banks and payment networks at all. Their roles will probably change. They will probably do things in different ways. But we don't see a central bank being the one and only issuer of currency and managing the payment network where I pay with my card or QR code or whatever I'm going to be. So we're definitely not saying that it's only the central bank. It's everybody that's in that triangle, all the institutions and the private companies and the payment providers still probably have some sort of role, but probably not, very likely to be the same as what it is, so different ways. And I think that's really important because central banks aren't going to deal with loans, for example, to people. Central banks aren't going to deal with chargebacks. I mean, actually, good point. You wouldn't have chargebacks with blockchain. Good benefit there. So I think it's really important. We're not suggesting you get rid of all these. This is not this sort of utopia where you do. In 1,000 years, maybe. Don't know, but I won't be around in 1,000 years, that's for sure. Anything to comment on that question, Jeff? Brett?
No, I'd say the technology could support that. That's not what my customers are asking for right now. So, it's much more an approach where we're using the current players to assist in this rollout of central bank digital currency.
Cool. So Jeff's saying it's not the question. The question is how individuals transact without having to ask permission from gatekeepers. It's all on one ledger at the end of the day. So it's about all connected ledgers. So you don't need to ask for permission. So it's about how you architect the links between and the interoperability. I don't think we've got 1 minute. Sylvia's question, is Bhutan or another small open economy? If it's to be more integrated in the financial system, thanks to CBDCs, would these economies be more vulnerable to external shocks? Interesting question. What's your thoughts, Brett?
I'm certainly not an economist, but I think that there'd be massive upticks in their economy from opening this up. Yeah. Would those newfound gains be vulnerable? I could see that. Yeah, I think that's a great point, but no worse than where they are right now. So I think they'll still be better off where they are now. They open their capital markets to the world and people start investing in Bhutan. I think it will be massive for them.